It was a dark and cold night. I was working in a courier warehouse, sorting and packing parcels. I was used to the tranquility of the late night, just the roar of the machine and the low conversation of my workmates. However, the atmosphere seemed a bit strange that night. I was working with my colleague Chris in an isolated area, as we were dealing with some oversized items. Chris was a big guy, full of beard, looking a bit scary, but he was actually very kind. That night, Chris looked a bit nervous, and he kept looking at the dark corners of the warehouse as if there was something. Suddenly, I heard a strange sound, like the whispering of a low murmur, and I couldn't understand what it was. I looked at Chris, and he looked even more nervous. He said in a trembling voice that he had heard the noise too. We stopped our work and listened quiet, the deafening silence surrounded us. Suddenly, I saw a dark shadow in the corner of the warehouse. It looked like a person standing there. The light flickered, and the shadow disappeared. I panicked and realized that we might not have enjoyed the peace of being alone in this warehouse and immediately dialed 911, and told Chris to keep me in sight at all times. But to my horror, Chris disappeared suddenly in the darkness. Controlled by fear, my heartbeat pounded in my chest. I called out Chris loudly. Then, I heard a scream, which was obviously from Chris. His voice was full of despair and fear. I immediately ran towards the scream. In a dark corner, I saw Chris fallen on the ground, his eyes wide with terror, pointing to the other side of the warehouse. I looked over along his gaze and saw an old woman, with tattered clothes, full of wrinkles, coming out of the darkness. Her eyes stared at us hollowly. Then, she started to move towards us slowly, her lips moving, whispering something incomprehensible. Just as she got closer to us, I noticed that her feet weren't touching the ground, she seemed to be floating in midair. The sky started to rain heavily, the warehouse door was shaking in the wind, and I saw the red and blue lights of the police car flashing in the distance. The old woman looked at me, a strange smile on her face, then she disappeared into the darkness again. By the time the police came in, they found me and Chris on the ground. He was sent to the hospital. Since that day, I never went back to that courier warehouse. I found a job that I could work during the daytime to avoid the endless night. I remind myself at all times to be careful no matter where I am because you never know what you will encounter. However, the terrifying memory still troubles me every day, and I cannot erase it. Chris, who used to be busy, has disappeared now. He seems to have been defeated by this terrifying experience and cannot interact with people. I tried to contact him, but he chose to remain silent that night. Although I am trying my best to restore normal life, the fear and unease in my heart can never be eliminated. Such things have happened before, and it may happen again. I hope that we can all be in a safe environment, but perhaps we can never avoid those terrifying things, especially when we are alone in the dark. I hope my story can alert everyone to remain vigilant when something unusual happens in life, because our life and safety surpasses everything. You can always find another job. If something feels wrong, don't ignore your intuition. You need to ensure your safety at all times, don't let this fear become your nightmare. Although we can't predict the future, we can prevent the horror experience from happening again. What we have experienced will make us stronger, but we should not let the past dominate our lives. I hope my story will leave a profound impression on you and remind you to protect yourself at all times, and avoid being controlled by fear, and to pay attention to everything around you. Although real malice and fear exist in the world, we always have the right to choose to resist. We need to learn how to adapt to the dark, resolve our fears, and protect our safety. I hope that after hearing my story, you can be more alert to avoid falling into a situation similar to mine.